On September 11, 2001, 19 terrorists from the Islamist terrorist organization Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial airliners, crashing 2 of them into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City and 1 into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. In under 2 hours, the most devastating terrorist attack ever perpetrated on American soil had killed nearly 3,000 civilians, injured 6,000 more, and irreparably marred a national sense of security. On September 20th, President George W. Bush issued an ultimatum to the Taliban government in Afghanistan: turn over al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden or prepare for war. Consequently, the war on terror began on October 7, 2001, as US and UK forces began aerial bombing strikes on al-Qaeda and Taliban forces. President Bush laid out 5 key objectives for the war on terror. 1. Defeat terrorists like Osama bin Laden and destroy their organizations. 2. Identify, locate, and destroy terrorists along with their organizations. 3. Deny sponsorship, support, and sanctuary for terrorists and their organizations. 4. Diminish the underlying conditions that terrorists seek to exploit. And 5. Defend U.S. citizens and interests at home and abroad. While this effort has taken many forms, such as the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, a restriction on immigration, and military operations in the Philippines and the Horn of Africa, the most prominent struggle has been in Afghanistan. This war, however, has not come without great cost. To date, 2,740 U.S. and coalition forces have died, with over 20,000 wounded. Furthermore, over 10,000 Afghan security forces have been killed, with estimates of civilian deaths ranging from 14,000 to 34,000. Human rights abuses have been noted widely, from the record-high drug production, the rearming of vicious Afghan warlords, the use of white phosphorus, and the authorization of torture by the CIA. In turn, it is important to examine how ethics take form in war, and how the United States government and military can best respond to abhorrent acts with responsibility and justice. The war on terror may never be won, but in order to promote a free and prosperous Afghanistan, the American people must hold their government accountable for their actions and push for policies that will win Afghanistan not through the seizure of terrain and the destruction of forces, but through winning over the population with cultural understanding. Justice has been a cornerstone of the war on terror, if not in practice, at least in rhetoric. Moral theorist Michael Walzer claims that the ethical absolutes the United States have arrived at and our corresponding actions have been propelled by the extremism of terrorism. Terrorism, he claims, represents the erasure of moral limits, the murder of innocent civilians, and the targeting of a whole society based solely on who they are. Major Tony Pfaff, a foreign area officer in the United States military detachment in Kuwait, makes the case for dual ethical considerations of justice in war. The first, jus ad bellum, is concerned with the justness of entrance into war. In the war on terror, few would argue that this condition has not been satisfied. The second, jus in bello, refers to how the war is carried out. It is in war that the issues of justice have arisen, and it is in war that the public has the responsibility to fight for a moral and ethical approach for the global community. Our quest for justice, however, has been largely based on a retributive lens where an ideal theory and moral absolutes reign supreme. Charles Mills argues against ideal theory due to the fact that ideal theory presupposes an idealized cognitive sphere, an idealized social ontology, and an ahistoric view. Unfortunately, the pursuit of justice in Afghanistan has been irreparably shaped by the images of 9/11. In turn, Mills argues that we suffer from constrained choices and reason. A structural approach to justice, such as that of John Rawls, is incredibly difficult to apply. Richard Rorty, however, presents a sentimentalist approach in which the United States can attempt to promote justice for the people of Afghanistan. 36% of households in Afghanistan are below the poverty line, and Afghanistan contains over 130,000 internally displaced persons due to drought and instability in the southern and western parts of the country. The people of Afghanistan lack the requisite sympathy and security required, in Rorty's view, for justice to prevail. By contextualizing the plight of the average Afghan civilian, we can better serve both the United States and Afghanistan in achieving justice. The war on terror has had far-reaching effects on varying degrees of publics worldwide. The government, armed forces, and citizens of the United States and coalition forces all have a vested interest in both the means and end of the war on terror. Furthermore, the innocent civilians of Afghanistan have indisputably suffered the most from the negative effects of the war on terror. Hannah Arendt argues that the public consists of those who are able to collectively challenge the power of government. Similarly, John Dewey argues that a public exists when this group recognizes the existence of a problem and reflects upon the impacts, whether apparent or hidden, that occur on a group outside of their own. This idea of a public is particularly useful in the War on Terror because it speaks to the political machinations of the United States that result in policy decisions. As a group, the American people have the ability to change political leadership and collectively push for policies in the War on Terror that are just. As expected, military expertise has played a large role in how the United States has acted in the War on Terror. However, the emergence of fourth-generation warfare ought to signal the necessity for a paradigm shift in the type of experts the United States needs. In fourth-generation warfare, the goals of the belligerents are survival and protraction of war to convince the enemy that a continuance of war is too costly given the perceived benefits. While General David Petraeus is the author of the Counterinsurgency Handbook, that is no substitute for an expert with a deep cultural understanding of Afghanistan and its people. While military experts are essential to winning a traditional war, the war in Afghanistan requires not the seizing of terrain nor the destruction of forces, but rather winning over its population. In order to fight the war on terror more ethically, the United States must better understand and serve the Afghan people, placing a greater emphasis on gaining the trust and help of Afghan experts. The War on Terror was built initially on a foundation of responsibility that was without nuance both morally and politically. The political responsibility of the American government is first and foremost to its people. Moreover, it is to keep its people safe. Moral responsibility is slightly more complicated, but faced with the absence of morality that reared its ugly head on 9/11, the United States government felt an absolute moral responsibility in the War on Terror to respond. However, in order to rectify the issues of justice caused by the War on Terror, there must be recognition of the collective political responsibility of the American people. Arendt argues that there is a collective responsibility for the requisite public and that individuals in the public must be held responsible for something they have not explicitly done. This responsibility stems from that individual's membership in a group which cannot be dissolved at will. The actions of the American government in the War on Terror are constantly analyzed by the global community. The collective responsibility of the American people is not for the consideration of self. Instead, Arendt argues that responsibility is for the fate of the nation and its conduct towards other nations in the world. In sum, as Major Pfaff affirms, in the midst of our justifiable anger, we must take care not to become like the enemy we fight. The moral complexity of the War on Terror has far too often been subjugated by the United States' anger and fear. By recognizing that the actions of the American government are inexorably representative of the American people as a whole, we ought to recognize our ability, and thus our obligation, to compel our leaders to pursue a course of action that is both morally and politically responsible. In turn, we can help assure that the future of the War on Terror tells a different story. As Dr. David DeCassi states, it is not enough that we become less afraid and more safe. We should also become more just.